14 years ago, our 12-man squad was on a standard issue rear reconnaissance patrol. But what we found in that perfect cave, nestled in a natural depression, wasn't Taliban militants at all. We encountered an ancient entity, something impossibly vast, beyond human comprehension. My comrades vanished in an instant, and military high command forced me to sign an NDA claiming nothing had ever happened. The story begins with the intel officer briefing us on the mission. According to Sigint, there's a natural cave system here. About 3 weeks ago, we intercepted a short-wave communication from this area. The content was unclear Pashto, but mentioned 2 words, Guardian and Gate. The frequency hasn't been used since. The intel officer paused. He looked like he wanted to say something, then swallowed it. Someone among us whistled. Guardian, Gota. Sounded like some kind of code name. Maybe a high-value target's hideout. Maybe an arms cache. In Afghanistan, you never knew what was behind the next door. The mission brief was simple. Maneuver to the target area. Conduct external reconnaissance of the cave entrance. Confirm any signs of human activity. Collect environmental data. Then exfil under cover of darkness. No entry into the cave. No engagement unless directly threatened. In short, a standard issue rear patrol, as standard as they come. By the time we packed our gear, dusk was already settling. In the deep Afghan autumn, daylight slid off the ridges like melting butter. I remember standing in the camp's ammo stack area, slotting the last few magazines into my plate carrier. The air smelled of diesel, the damp earth seeping from HESCO barriers, and the distant tang of burning latrines. A frontline scent, strangely comforting. It was then that our translator, a local hire named Ahmed, in his 40s with a grizzled beard, who'd served as a militiaman during the Soviet invasion, walked over and looked at us with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. He wasn't scared. He'd worked at the FOB for 2 years, seen Taliban rockets, suicide trucks, and the IED-shattered corpses of our own. He was never the type to be afraid. But that day, he looked at us and whispered a single sentence. His voice was low, as if afraid some drone circling overhead might hear. Don't go into that cave. If you see that cave, don't go near it. What the old men in the village tell, those aren't just stories. Someone among us laughed. I remember it was Crawford, our machine gunner, a Texan who always chewed tobacco and treated any talk of the supernatural as a joke. He clapped Ahmed on the shoulder and said a line we'd regret for a long, long time. Buddy, we're not hunting Pokemon. We're just clearing the sector. We'll clear it and be back. Ahmed didn't laugh. He shook his head, turned, and walked away. After about 5 steps, he suddenly stopped his back to us and said something that still gives me chills when I think about it. In those mountains, there are things older than the Taliban. All right, before we officially step into that night, I want to take a few minutes to talk to you about a concept. A concept I believe every person who's spent enough time on the battlefield eventually has to confront. That's the boundary, the line between reality and unreality. In daylight, that boundary is sharp, keen as a blade. Ballistics, tactics, casualty rates, rules of engagement. Everything is quantifiable, analyzable, predictable. But when the sun sinks behind those ancient mountains, darkness doesn't simply fall. It seeps out from the fissures in the rock, from the parched riverbeds, from the soil soaked in millennia of war. In that kind of darkness, in that absolute silence where almost no human sound can reach, that boundary begins to blur. It's not that you're crossing it. It's as if it thins itself. Thins enough that you can hear the sound from the other side. Many old soldiers will tell you the same thing. On a real battlefield, especially in places with no civilians, no infrastructure, just you pitted against an ancient, indifferent landscape, a profoundly unsettling sensation washes over you. You feel watched, not by the enemy. You can sense that because in those environments, enemy observation is purposeful, heavy, it has a distinct direction. But the feeling I'm talking about is different. It has no direction, no purpose. It just exists, like you're standing in a vast room, and you know there's something in that room, right behind you, but you're not sure what it is, and it's in no rush to reveal itself. I've seen too many soldiers react to this feeling. Some became irritable, blaming everything on nerves, then doubled down on night vision and thermal imaging, as if seeing no human-shaped thermal signatures in the green-hued display proved everything was normal. Some became silent, starting to wake frequently in the middle of the night, staring blankly at the tent's ceiling. And some, a very few of them, started drawing strange things on paper meant for letters home. Not figures, not words, but repetitive, spiraling lines. I asked one man what he was drawing. He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "I don't know. I just felt I had to draw it." All right, back to the mission that day. Exactly 9 p.m., we departed. 12 men, 2 all-terrain vehicles, plus 1 spare. Standard configuration. I was squad leader, call sign 6. My deputy, Sergeant Rodriguez, call sign 6B. Machine gunner Crawford, medic Chun, demolitions expert Vickers, comm specialist Carson. The rest were scout riflemen and 2 designated marksmen. The convoy advanced north along a long-abandoned dry riverbed. No headloads. Everyone wore third-generation night vision devices. The display a light green that made eyes ache. Driving ATVs in this terrain was a challenge in itself. The gravel in the riverbed varied in size, and the sound of wheels grinding over it was repeatedly torn apart by the night wind, reaching your ears as a low-frequency noise akin to a sigh. After about an hour's drive, we reached the furthest point vehicles could traverse, a narrow canyon entrance. Rock walls on both sides stretched upwards, disappearing beyond the effective range of the NVGs. The air changed here. No longer the dry and slightly cool air of open ground. It became heavy, stagnant, carrying a very subtle sense of being enclosed. Like opening a cellar no one had entered for a long time. Not a musty smell, but a more primal scent, similar to the piezoelectric sensation in the air before a heavy rain, but more intense, more palpable. I ordered everyone to dismount, transitioning to a foot patrol formation. Standard tactical column. Guide at the very front, then the point man. I was in the forward middle position. Behind me, in sequence, were the machine gun team, demolitions team, and medic, the rear guard handled by the most experienced veteran, Hendricks. We turned from the canyon into an even narrower crevice. The rock walls on both sides could now almost be touched by hand. The world under NVGs lost all natural colors. Only subtle differences in grayscale remained. Dry rock was light gray. Places where water seeped were deep gray, almost black, and the sky, a long, thin ribbon squeezed by the mountains on both sides, was a hollow, starless, pale white gray. We walked for about 40 minutes. No sound, no insect chirps, no wind, no sign of any nocturnal animal activity. In the deep mountains of Afghanistan, this in itself was the loudest alarm. In normal mountains, especially in autumn, mountain foxes and hyenas are very active. But here, it was as if we had just crossed an invisible boundary. After crossing, the world of sound was completely stripped from our perception. Then, Chin suddenly stopped. Medic Chun, a young Chinese-American man from Los Angeles. Usually quiet, but every time he spoke, he hit the nail on the head. The way he stopped was wrong. Not the slowing down to find a route in complex terrain, but a sudden, almost instinctive halt, as if his foot had just touched something he didn't want to touch. I whispered through the squad comms, "Chun, what's your status?" He didn't answer immediately. After about 5 seconds, he slowly raised his right hand, making a gesture all soldiers recognized. Halt. Then, he slowly lowered his head, looking at his boots. I took 2 steps closer, following his gaze. There was nothing on the ground. Gravel, dust, occasional exposed slate fragments. But Chin's voice, when he finally spoke, didn't sound like himself. "Sir, can you feel it?" he asked. "Feel what?" "The ground. Beneath the ground." In that moment, I did feel something, an incredibly faint vibration, rising from beneath my feet. Not the rhythmic sway of an earthquake, but a sustained, uniform pulse, like standing on the casing of some colossal machine. And that machine was running, but its operation wasn't mechanical, it was more biological. A heartbeat, a breath, but magnified hundreds of times, slowed dozens. You could barely hear it, barely feel it, but your body knew it was there. Your inner ear would tell you. Your Achilles tendons would tell you. The roots of your teeth would tell you. I ordered the team to hold position. Kill all active light sources, including weapon lights and any strobes. Then I had Carson attempt to raise FOB for a sit rep. Carson worked his comms for about a minute, then looked up. Even in the monochromatic green glow of the NVGs, I could see the confusion etched on his face. Sir, comms are completely dead. Not interference. Just nothing. Absolute silence. I sent out a burst but got no echo. No reply. It's like we're under a shroud. A shroud. Those were his exact words. We pushed on. There was no other choice. Under the rules of engagement, a comms blackout alone wasn't a withdrawal condition. But losing NAV-SAT, radio comms, and terrain reference points simultaneously, that was a different animal entirely. I should have ordered a retreat then. I should have adhered to the principle hammered into us during countless briefings. In an uncertain environment, falling back is always a legitimate tactical option. But that night, I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it was the feeling of being watched, growing so intense that turning your back felt like exposing yourself. Maybe it was the canyon's geometry, the rock walls converging inward in a way that defied natural geology, pushing us forward like some colossal intestine. Maybe it was just arrogance. We trusted our gear too much, trusted that safe, pale green world inside our NVGs too much, trusted our ability to handle any situation too much. Regardless, we pushed on. After another 20 minutes or so, the canyon abruptly ended. Not a gradual widening, but like a door suddenly thrown open, one step out of the narrow, oppressive passage and into a completely open space. A natural, circular depression, roughly 150 meters in diameter, surrounded by near vertical cliffs, their tops meeting the sky with not a single trace of vegetation. The floor of the depression was unnaturally flat, not the kind of smoothness achieved by natural erosion, but as if something had pressed it down, or swept it clean, and in the dead center of the depression, almost precisely at its geometric heart, was a hole. I can't accurately describe the first impression that maw of a hole made on the 12 of us. It wasn't big. During our terrain identification courses at the training center, they gave us standard terminology for cave classifications. Shafts, solution holes, ice caves, rifts. But this hole didn't fit any category. It was a near-perfect ellipse with a major axis of roughly 25 meters and a minor axis of 18. Its edges were unnaturally smooth, not the rounded wear of water erosion, but a more absolute, geometrically precise smoothness, as if someone or something had used a blade larger than the mountain itself to carve a perfectly regular aperture into the rock. The opening faced upward, slightly tilted like a half-closed eye. We fanned out about 80 meters away, using the natural rock formations along the depression's rim for cover. I took 15 seconds to assess the terrain, designated 3 observation posts, then ordered an outer perimeter established. Once everyone was in position, I moved forward about 30 meters toward the opening with Rodriguez, Crawford, and Carson dropping prone behind a prominent rock ridge to begin scanning with the handheld thermal imager. The results were 0. No heat signatures. No human, no animal. Not even the rock itself registered normal thermal radiation. It was unnaturally cold. But thermal imagers have an interesting characteristic. When aimed into a sufficiently deep void, they display a peculiar, chaotic noise pattern, as minute fluctuations in air temperature, humidity, and pressure create unresolvable signals on the sensor. That's what we were seeing. A slow, churning mass of thermodynamically inexplicable turbulence, welling up from the depths of the opening. It's like something's breathing down there, Carson whispered. I ordered him to try communications again. Still no signal. That's when Crawford did something none of us had time to stop. He stood up, left the rock ridge, and walked toward the cave mouth. Not a run, not a tactical advance, but that slow, almost unconscious shuffle of someone drawn by something beyond their control. I called his name. He didn't respond. I raised my voice, almost a shout. Still nothing. It was as if his ears no longer registered sound on our frequency. I went after him. Rodriguez and Carson were right behind me. We caught up to Crawford about 10 meters in. He stood there, head tilted slightly back, mouth agape, staring straight into the cave mouth. "Look," he said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. I stepped beside him, flicked on my shoulder-mounted tactical light, and angled the beam into the opening. The cave was far deeper than we'd anticipated. The light couldn't reach the bottom, only illuminating the walls for about 15 meters from the rim. The rock face was dark gray, smooth as polished glass, devoid of stalactites or stalagmites, lacking any features typical of a natural cavern. The walls bore markings, not natural striations, but parallel, equidistant grooves, as if scored by colossal claws. Each groove was approximately 3 centimeters deep, spaced about 12 centimeters apart, running from the cave mouth downward, disappearing into the black. I'm not sure how long I stood there. Perhaps a dozen seconds, perhaps several minutes. My perception of time had ceased to be reliable. I remember hearing a sound rising from the cave. Very low, very slow. It wasn't like a sound. It was more like being in a sealed room and hearing someone knocking on the wall in the next room. But the knocking wasn't carried by the air. It was transmitted through the very structure of the building itself. That sound traveled through the soles of my boots, up my shins, through my spine, directly into my inner ear. It was infrasound. I know what infrasound is. I know it can induce anxiety, dizziness, nausea, and an inexplicable sense of dread. But knowledge is one thing. When your body actually starts reacting to sounds you can't consciously hear, that's something else entirely. My heart began to pound against my ribs, not from exertion, but a physiological, forced acceleration. My skin, especially on the back of my neck and forearms, began to prickle, that tingling sensation you get when standing near high voltage cables. My taste buds registered metal, blood, the taste of rust when adrenaline floods your system. Then we heard footsteps. Footsteps rising from the cave. No, not footsteps. Something else. Rhythmic. Heavy. Each impact made the loose scree at the cave mouth subtly jump. One step. A pause of roughly 4 seconds. Another step. Still 4 seconds. Then a third. The sound climbed, rising from the dark depths along those slick rock walls. We fell back. No one gave the order. 12 men executed the exact same tactical maneuver simultaneously, facing the cave mouth, retreating irresistibly. This wasn't fear. Fear makes you turn and run. This wasn't that. This was a deeper, older signal etched into our very genes. Your reptilian brain screaming. What you're facing isn't on your food chain. It's beyond your comprehension. Later, after I submitted the incomplete, redacted after-action report, I was required to undergo 3 psychological evaluations. Each time, the evaluator asked me the same question: what exactly did you see? I gave the same answer every time, an answer that increasingly unsettled even me. I don't know. I don't know what it was. I saw a shape rising from the cave mouth. It was too big, not just bigger than a man, but bigger than the very concept of big itself. Through the night vision optics, I saw an irregular, extremely low reflectivity object detach from the cave's darkness, moving up, then out like a shadow, solidifying. Its outline shifted constantly in the green-tinted view, not because it was morphing, but because my brain couldn't process the visual information it was emitting. It was too massive and too close. Like a single pixel on your screen, expanding endlessly until you can no longer perceive its whole, only a fragment, then misinterpreting that fragment as the entirety. What I saw was a part, a shoulder, or a shoulder-like structure. It emerged from the darkness on the right side of the opening. Its surface wasn't skin, wasn't chitin, wasn't any material I could classify. It was more like dark gray granite. But as you stared, you realized it was changing form at an excruciatingly slow pace. Not flowing, but more like breathing. The rock was breathing. Then it raised its head. I know that sounds absurd. How could something in a cave raise a head? But that's what I saw. Above that massive, irregular structure, another form materialized from the darkness. A smaller, relatively ovoid structure. And on this structure, 2 points ignited. Not eyes, Not any bioluminescent organ. More like two rocks heated to incandescence, emitting a dull red, almost painful light. Those 2 points of light didn't scan us, didn't move, didn't even possess any directional quality. But they instilled in me an absolute, unshakable certainty. It was watching us, not observing us with light, but through a more direct, non-visual means. It was perceiving us. Its perception pierced our skin, tore through our muscle and bone, reaching the most core, most vulnerable parts of us. Our consciousness, our memories, our very understanding of existence itself. I didn't fire. None of us fired. Not because we'd forgotten how to use our weapons. Not because we were frozen by fear. But because, in that instant, shooting that thing with bullets felt like punching a hurricane. You knew it was futile. Not just physically futile, but conceptually futile. Firing implied you assumed the other party shared the same physical rules as you. But what we faced didn't share those rules. Crawford was the first to make a sound. Not a scream. It was a choked gasp, squeezed from the deepest part of his throat. The sound a drowning man makes clutching at a final straw. Then, he raised his M249 saw. Raised it, but he didn't fire. He just held it like a child holding a toy water gun. Those 2 points of dull red light shifted, incredibly slowly. They moved away from us, then focused on Crawford. Then it did something. It extended a hand, if that could be called a hand. Extended it from the opening. Not an attack, not a grab, but a slow, almost curious extension. Did that hand have 5 fingers? I wasn't sure. I counted, but each time the result was different. Sometimes 4, sometimes 6, sometimes no fingers at all, but a more irregular fractal protrusion. But I distinctly remembered one thing. The end of each digit was far narrower than its base, tapering like a cone. The fingertips bore no nails, but a substance with a dull metallic sheen. This hand didn't touch any of us. It stopped about 2 meters from Crawford, suspended in midair, fixed like a sculpture for several seconds. Then it did a second thing. It opened its hand. It was this gesture, this simple, open-handed gesture, like a giant trying to tell you, look at me. I am empty. There is nothing in my hand. But if you had been standing there, if you had seen that image through the sickly green filter of night vision, you would understand what I felt. It wasn't a display. It was a declaration. It was saying, I need to hold nothing in my hand, because everything I can do requires no tools. It was at that moment I smelled it. Not the faint, cellar-like mustiness from before. This was a new, overwhelming stench, almost a physical blow. It surged from the opening, like an invisible wall, slamming directly into us. So potent that my nasal passages were instantly and completely overwhelmed, then my throat, my lungs. I almost thought I would suffocate. What was that smell? It took me 14 years to recall and analyze it. It wasn't putrid flesh, not sulfur, not chemical reagents. It was more like something incredibly ancient, like the scent you might find in an unopened Egyptian tomb, the smell of time itself. But not just time. There was something animalistic to it, the body odor of some colossal, long-slumbering beast, freshly roused. Potent, musky, raising the hairs on your neck. Chun later told me the smell triggered a reaction in his body he'd never experienced before. Not nausea, not dizziness, but a complete, autonomic nervous system collapse. His pupils dilated to their maximum in seconds, then constricted to their smallest. His sweat glands simultaneously secreted cold and hot perspiration. His skin erupted in welts as if seared by something. My own reaction was even stranger. The moment that smell enveloped me, the visual field shifted. Not a hallucination, not an imagined construct, but a new layer of imagery superimposed upon the world before my eyes. I saw a plane. Not the gray, gravelly plains of Afghanistan, but a vast, boundless black plain illuminated by a dim, reddish light. Nothing on the plain, no vegetation, no stones, no water. Only marks on the ground, drag marks. Colossal, continuous drag marks crisscrossing like dry riverbeds. I didn't know what had left those marks, but I knew one thing for certain. Those marks stretched in a single direction. All of them led towards a vague, colossal, slowly rotating thing on the horizon. The vision lasted less than a second. Then a thunderous crack dragged me back to reality. It wasn't from the cave. It came from behind us. Carson's comms unit, the radio that had been completely dead, suddenly erupted with a massive surge of static. The sheer volume of that unheralded white noise instantly overloaded everyone's hearing. I instinctively spun around, seeing Carson on the ground, clutching the radio, hands clamped over his ears, face buried in the gravel. The instant I turned to Carson, a dull thud echoed from behind me. Not a gunshot. It was heavier, wetter, like a massive stone plunging into a pool of mud. I spun back. Crawford was gone. Where he'd been standing, where he'd held his machine gun, there was nothing. Not fallen, not dragged away, but as if he'd never existed. Impossibly clean. The gravel on the ground was undisturbed. No blood, no spent casings, not even the faint impressions his boots should have left. But on the rock face at the cave's edge, a fresh gouge had appeared. From that gouge, a liquid slowly seeped downwards, tracing a path along the slick rock. Through the night vision optics, the liquid was dark gray, almost imperceptible. But if I told you I vomited bile during my subsequent psychological evaluation, it was because I knew exactly what that liquid was in that moment. It wasn't gray. It only appeared gray in that light. It was red, deep crimson, almost black. I don't know who fired first. Maybe Rodriguez. Maybe Hendricks. Maybe me. I only remember that in the moments after Crawford vanished, the entire depression filled with gunfire. Not rhythmic, controlled bursts, but the madness of 12 men simultaneously pulling triggers, unleashing every round they had into that cave mouth. 5 56mm rounds sparked off the rock face. 7 62mm sniper rounds left bright tracer trails through the night vision optics. Explosives. Vickers tossed 2 fragmentation grenades into the opening, their flashes briefly turning the entire depression to blinding day. Then, in a momentary lull in the firing, I heard a sound. Not gunfire, not an explosion, but a sigh, rising from the depths of the cave mouth. Not a sigh of pain, not a sigh of anger, but a sigh closer to disappointment. Like the helpless, weary sigh an adult might make watching a clueless child perform some utterly meaningless act. The gunfire didn't make the thing disappear, but after a sigh, its shape began to recede from the opening. Not fleeing, not vanishing, but a deliberate, calculated withdrawal from our field of vision. First, the hand retracted. Then, those 2 points of dark red light slowly descended, sinking into the deep darkness. Finally, the massive, shoulder-like structure, like a mountain slowly submerging, disappeared below the mouth of the cave. The entire withdrawal lasted approximately 30 seconds. For those 30 seconds, we kept firing. Then it was gone. The hollow returned to silence. Not a normal silence, but an immense, hollowed-out silence, echoing with tinnitus. The 12 of us stood there, muzzles smoking, ears ringing from the continuous firing and explosions. The rock face of the opening was riddled with bullets. Shattered rock and dust hung heavy in the air, mingling with that ancient smell from before and the sulfuric stench of burnt gunpowder. I did what I had to do. I ordered cease fire, accounted for personnel, collected gear, and prepared for extraction. Carson reported comms were intermittently restoring. I squatted down, clutching a handful of shattered rock from the ground, letting the sharp shards pierce my palm, using the pain to confirm I was still in reality. Then I saw something. At the exact spot where Crawford had vanished, among the shattered rock on the ground, was a small piece of reflective metal. I walked over and picked it up. A military identification tag. Crawford's dog tag. The metal surface bore no bullet marks, no distortion or deformation, only along the edge, along the smoothest cut surface, a very thin, dark red coating. I rubbed the coating with my finger. It wasn't liquid. It wasn't blood. It was more like an interface layer formed by one substance, in a way I couldn't comprehend, atomically interpenetrating with another. I put the dog tag into my pocket. We pulled out. On the way back from that hollow to the ATVs, no one spoke. Not the silence of maintaining radio discipline, but a silence where you no longer had words to use. I walked in the middle of the formation, watching the backs of the team members ahead in the green world of the night vision goggles, watching their mechanically swinging arms and heads that barely turned sideways. We were no longer a recon unit. We were a group of survivors just vomited out of a place that didn't belong to this world. It was past 0400 when we got back to FOB Delta. I gathered everyone at the ammo stack area, didn't go back to the barracks, just stood there in the coldest, darkest air before dawn. I told each of them what happened tonight until further orders was classified. Don't write it in letters. Don't talk about it on the phone. Don't mention it to your buddies when drunk. If you need to talk, come to me. Or go to your trusted spiritual advisor. But absolutely do not let it become camp chatter. Then I went back to my tent, sat on the cot, took off my NVGs, turned off the light, and sat in absolute darkness for a full hour. I waited for that smell to reappear. Waited for the infrasonic vibrations to return through the floor. Waited for those 2 points of dark red light to glow in some corner of the darkness. Nothing happened, but nothing made me feel at ease either. The next morning, the camp intelligence officer summoned me. It wasn't me who went to him, but he sent a military policeman to call me to his office. When I walked in, there were 2 other people in the room. One in civilian clothes, no rank insignia, but I noticed on his belt a specific type of metal buckle used only by specific personnel from specific agencies. The other in an Air Force uniform, colonel rank. I didn't know him, and he didn't look me in the eye. The intelligence officer told me to sit. Then he asked why my sitrep from last night hadn't been submitted on time. I said comms were down. He said the comms outage log showed only about 40 minutes, and I should have submitted it immediately after the outage ended. I said I hadn't submitted it because I was waiting to confirm some information. He asked what information. I looked him in the eye. Then I looked at the civilian. Then I looked back at him. I said, "Sir, I need to submit a written report, but not here. I need to submit it in a formal setting with recording equipment and third-party witnesses." The civilian smiled. Not a friendly smile. It was the kind of sneer that said you were already dead, but you just didn't know it yet. The colonel spoke. His voice was unervingly calm, a calm no colonel should possess. "Sergeant Ryan, we already have your report. Your comms specialist automatically uploaded partial data from the action recorder once communications were restored. Most of the audio data was corrupted for unknown reasons, but the location and physiological monitoring data is intact." He paused. He picked up a manila envelope from the table, but didn't hand it to me, merely held it, tapping it lightly with his knuckles. "The data shows you were in the target area for approximately 47 minutes. During that time, the average heart rate for all 12 personnel consistently exceeded 140 beats per minute. The highest instantaneous heart rate, yours, reached 211 beats per minute. That figure, while stationary, is medically impossible. How do you think a medical officer would interpret this data?" I didn't answer. He continued, "Your report isn't needed. At least, not your verbal account. When you return, you'll receive a complete after-action summary. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement, confirming you've read and understood this summary. And in this summary, there will be no mention of any giants, no mention of any dark red light, no mention of any existence beyond current human comprehension in the deep mountains of Afghanistan. You will use your rank, your honor, and your full commitment as a United States Marine to confirm this summary is true and complete. Do you have any questions, Sergeant?" I straightened up. I looked at the severely faded flag hanging on the wall. I heard my own voice say, "No, sir." The colonel placed the envelope on the table, slowly pushing it towards me. "Good. Sergeant, from this moment on, you will never hear anyone mention what happened last night for the rest of your life. I suggest you do the same." I picked up the envelope and left the office. 14 years passed. I brought that dog tag back to the States. At first, I locked it in an ammo box in the garage. Later, when I moved, I hid it in the sole of an old combat boot. Then I got divorced, and my ex-wife almost threw it out while clearing clutter, which led to a massive argument. She asked what could possibly make me so furious. I didn't tell her the truth. I said it was a memento from a fallen comrade. She said a comrade's memento should be returned to his family. I told her he had no family. That was the closest I'd ever come to the truth since that night. Crawford had no family. He was listed as non-combat casualty, missing in action. His name is etched on a brick at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. But beneath that brick, there are no ashes, no DNA, no material components that could be identified as human remains. And the dog tag in my pocket proved he had once existed. Over the years, I tried to track down the other team members. Rodriguez retired and went to Texas, working for a security firm. We spoke once on the phone. He asked if I remembered the smell. I said I did. He said he still smelled it every night. In his dreams, that smell would coalesce into something tangible, a slow-moving, colossal shape that filled his entire vision. He didn't ask me what it was. He didn't try to give a name. He just said, "Marcus, sometimes I think we didn't walk into a cave that night. We walked into a gateway connecting this timeline to another. And that thing, it wasn't a monster. It was a border guard. It was protecting that line from being crossed. Only the direction it was protecting it from was precisely the opposite of what we thought." After he said that, he was silent for a long time. Then he hung up. I never contacted him again. He never contacted me either. So this is my story, or rather, the part of it I'm able to tell. I buried the rest beneath that signed non-disclosure agreement, beneath years of psychotherapy records, beneath the same diagnostic conclusion written by 3 different therapists, growth following stress reaction, no clinical symptoms of PTSD. However, unresolved, atypical memory anomalies exist, requiring further investigation. Now, you know as much as I do, or as little as I do. I have but one last question left for you, and for all who are willing to hear this story. Deep within that mountain's maw, before that colossal, alien presence, an entity that defied every known classification system, in that fleeting instant, just before Crawford vanished, it opened its hand. It revealed an empty palm. There was no attack, no slaughter, no act we could possibly define as hostile. It simply extended its hand. Then, Crawford was gone. So what then made us the aggressors? Was it its mere existence? Was it our fear? Or was it that, deep within the evolutionary history of our species, in a memory long forgotten, buried beneath layers of myth and legend, a line of code was etched into our very being? Encounter the incomprehensible, conquer, destroy, or deny its existence. And that night, we merely executed that code with chilling fidelity. I don't believe I saw a monster. I believe I saw a mirror, a colossal, ancient mirror standing there since the very genesis of Earth. And what that mirror reflected wasn't our faces, but our species' utter powerlessness, our profound helplessness, and the devastating terror born from facing a true other. Fear made us pull the trigger. Fear made my comrades vanish into some mechanism we could never hope to comprehend. Fear made us sign the non-disclosure agreements, denying everything we had seen and heard. Fear, even at the end of this story, still prevents us from uttering its name. Not because it has no name, but because our language has simply not evolved enough to even begin to name it. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and the cavern in that mountain, it remains. Its maw, still half-lidded like an ancient, patient eye, waits for the next visitors armed with night vision and rifles, waits to once again slowly, almost tenderly, reveal the eternal void within its palm. If you ever go to Kandahar, do not ask the locals about the Guardian. They will tell you it is the mountain's business. And the mountain, it answers to no one.